Welcome to the realm of horror. On our channel, you'll find the most terrifying and chilling videos that will send shivers down your spine. From eerie tales to mysterious enigmas, we delve into the darkest corners of human imagination. Are you ready to confront the unknown? Subscribe to our channel if you dare to plunge into the world of nightmares.
This is the story of an experience I had in Cradle Mountain National Park in Tasmania, Australia, in my early teens. Despite causing no physical injury, it has haunted me into adulthood. I grew up in a family of avid hikers. Both my mother, a botanist, and my father, a biologist for the University of Tasmania, would regularly visit the deepest wilderness areas of Tasmania during their field studies. These trips were disguised as camping and hiking adventures for the family. I never minded, as I was just as passionate about the outdoors as they were, even from a young age. Key word being was, as after what I went through, even 20 plus years later, I still refused to return. We lived on a property a short driving distance from Lake St. Clair, a popular tourist destination. This was the only place my parents would allow me to camp and experience the wilderness alone, as long as I brought my German Shepherd with me. He was a former police dog and very well trained. At 12 or 13 years old, I didn't mind. It felt like my own little slice of freedom, in my own little slice of wilderness, despite being surrounded by people. It was easy to ignore them. But as I got older and more brazen, I found myself hounding my parents to let me take my quad bike deeper into the park to camp to test my own abilities and prove to them that I was capable of doing so and that I wasn't a little kid anymore. It was that overconfidence that led me to that situation and caused me this trauma. I was 15 at the time of the experience, at the age where I thought I was invincible, knew all there was to know, and was untouchable. After asking my parents for what felt like an uncountable number of times and being told no just as many times, I had enough and decided to just go. I told my parents that I and a few friends were going to the lake to camp and do some fishing over the weekend. Instead, I took my tent, my quad, and headed into the reserve. I left just after sunrise to maximize daylight and to make it as far in as I felt comfortable. Once arriving, I set up camp, had some food, and decided to go for an explore. I knew of a spot nearby with a gorgeous rock face where fossils had been found in the past, so I thought I'd try my luck. Shortly into the walk, I realized I'd been turned around and had no idea where I was anymore. At the time, I didn't see it as that big of a deal, as I had a compass and knew that if I headed south, it would take me back to the lake and I could walk from there. However, by this time, it was getting late in the afternoon, so stupidly, I decided to try my chances and make it back to my camp and quad bike so I wasn't walking back to camp from the lake in the dark. Big mistake. It was about 4:30 p.m., and the sun had begun to dip below the tree line, casting dark shadows across my walking path. That's when the forest went silent. And when I say silent, I mean silent, no wind, no birds, no forest sounds at all, which made my heart rate skyrocket. It was getting dark, and the silence was suffocating. I just wanted to get back to my camp, light a fire, eat some snacks, and spend my night watching nature's television until I fell asleep. That's when, from every direction, I would hear the sound of twigs cracking and something moving in the canopy above me. No big deal, probably birds or other small animals, I thought, within as clear as day. Hey, come here. At first, I felt relieved as I thought someone along the trails had seen me, noticed I was a bit disheveled and wanted to help. But looking around, I saw no one. I responded, "I can't see you, where are you?" and asked for some help because I thought I just couldn't see the person calling out. But then it happened again, to my left this time. That's when I decided to run. Took off into the brush and ran for a good 2 minutes before I stopped to catch my breath and look at my compass to start making my way towards the lake. I was terrified but felt I had covered enough distance that I wasn't in immediate danger. But seconds after checking my compass and starting to walk, I heard it again. "Hey, come here." This time, it was right behind me. I spun around and saw absolutely nothing, so I began sprinting again and didn't stop. The last thing I heard before bursting out of the trees onto the lakefront was the most evil, demonic laugh I had ever heard. It sounded like three people laughing at once. I immediately called my parents to come and get me, told them what I did and what happened, but they were more focused on my disobedience than my experience. The moment they picked me up was the first time I felt relief, and I cried the whole drive home. I didn't sleep properly for days. My dad went and picked up my quad and tidied up my camp. Since that day, I haven't stepped foot away from the lake. If anyone has had an experience like this, I'd love to hear it because it took my passion from me. I miss being out away from society, but I can't bring myself to do it.
"Hi, honey," I said, bustling over the stovetop. "How was your day?" He ignored me. He threw down his briefcase and got a beer from the fridge, the same as always. "Is dinner ready yet?" I pointed to the timer ticking on the kitchen counter. The meatloaf needed another 20 minutes. "I think the correct phrase is, what's cooking good looking," I joked. "Look, I've had a long day," he sighed, draining his beer. "Just come get me when it's ready." "I will, honey," I said. "After dinner I have a surprise for you." "Whatever." And with that he retreated upstairs to play video games. Supper seemed to be all he cared about these days. So long as he was fed, he appeared to want nothing else to do with me. I tried to get him to talk to me. Something was clearly bothering him. He just wouldn't open up. But that was all right. Once dinner was ready, I hollered up the stairs that it was time to eat. The spread was immaculate. Roast cauliflower with lemongrass and shallot, jacket potatoes with garlic confit, and for the main course, a beautiful meatloaf. My own recipe, his favorite. I thought he might even notice. Instead, he simply began eating without even looking at his plate, his eyes glued to his phone. But that was all right. After 15 minutes of silence, broken only by the sounds of chewing, I spoke up. "So, how's the meatloaf?" I asked. "Good," he grunted. "Curious about your surprise," I asked, smiling. "Want a hint?" "What do you want from me, Rose?" he scoffed, plating another ketchupy slice. "I didn't forget your birthday, did I?" His words stung, but I tried not to let it show. I'd been silently rehearsing what I was about to say for hours. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you," I said, "about the baby." He stopped chewing for a moment, his jaw set. He always wanted to be a father. But 6 months ago, I'd miscarried at 20 weeks. The doctors told me we shouldn't try again. I told you before that I didn't want to talk about it. "But I do," I said. "She was my baby, too." "If you can't give me a child," he said, popping the last of his meatloaf in his mouth, "then we have nothing more to talk about." "Oh, ow." He'd bitten down on something so hard he nearly cracked a tooth. As he gingerly pulled the thing from between his lips, he shuddered, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. He said, he asked softly, "You're sure?" I nodded. "There's leftovers in the freezer if you're still hungry." Belly button ring. "The kind his mistress wore." He clutched his mouth in horror, staring at me with more passion than he had in months. "Is this it, you crazy bitch?" he cried. "Is this the surprise?" "Of course not," I replied, pleased that I finally had his attention. "I was pregnant."
This is an experience I'll never forget. Simply thinking about the events that night gives me goosebumps. It happened when I was around 19 years old. AUR University had organized a cultural tour of the north of India, a very hilly, remote, and cold region. The roads were long and winding with mist and terrible visibility. We traveled by road all day to get to our hotel, which was located in a remote region a few hours away from the monasteries that we would be visiting the next day. Unfortunately, at around 11 p.m., our bus broke down. We were still a few hours away from our destination, so our bus operator made a few phone calls and got his friend to drive us to the nearest hotel that was huge. And surprisingly, empty. We were the only guests that night, around 30 of us students. And beyond that, we got settled in, and some people decided to drink and party. I was never much of a drinker, so I decided to spend time with two of my other girlfriends who were also sober. Midway through our conversation, we heard a shrill scream from the corridor. The girl in the next room was screaming hysterically and crying and refused to go back to her room. She claimed that someone was hiding behind the curtain and watching her, and that she made eye contact with the person before they disappeared. Everyone calmed her down, and the matter quickly ended there. However, soon after, the hotel staff began acting really weird. They turned off all the lights in the corridor room, demanded that everyone stayed in their rooms and locked their door, which we all did. We got back to chatting, and the others returned to the patio outside. I quickly fell asleep listening to the hum of my girlfriend's voices and was awoken by my friend. Her face was pale. She was shaking, and what she told me gives me shivers to this day. She heard my voice calling her name, laughing and mocking her, and asking her if she could see me, but the voice wasn't coming from me. My face was calm. I was asleep. It came from all around the room. When our other friend returned from the washroom, she couldn't make sense of this either, but something felt terribly off. And the room was so cold, even with the heaters working at full capacity. Eventually, everyone felt utterly creeped out, and around 9 of us decided to crash in the same room so we felt safer. In the middle of the night, my friend woke me and asked me if I heard the sound of footsteps and laughter in our room. I wanted to say no, but as I listened, I heard light footsteps and hushed giggling. Everyone was asleep, some even snoring. I woke my other friend, who never believed in anything paranormal, and he heard it as well. Now, we were all panicking and frozen, couldn't even turn the lights on. The sounds got more intense. The air felt thick and cold, and there was a whooshing feeling all around us. At this point, every single one of us was wide awake and close to screaming out. The sounds lasted for almost 5 minutes and stopped abruptly, and we noticed a black form bundled up in the corner of the room. We kept asking each other, "Do you see that?" It appeared out of nowhere, yet we could all see it. It then started to move, and my friend blurted out loud, "Oh my goodness, please leave us alone, I beg you." The whooshing then got intense, the black figure remained, and then there was silence again, followed by the most terrifying laughter, loud and clear. It sounded like a naughty child, but more like an adult mimicking a child's voice. We screamed and scrambled for the light switch, and suddenly everything was gone. No black formation in the corner, no whooshing, the air got lighter, and we felt warmer. The next morning, people staying in the other rooms also spoke of their own unique encounters. Everyone was sleep-deprived and disturbed. I keep wondering if it was possible that there could be some logical explanation for what happened, but it was all too real and a very spooky experience that I can only speak of / write about while it's still daytime. I arrived with my daughter to visit my grandmother. "Hang your cone up." Emily, my daughter, took off her blue raincoat and woolly hat and placed them on the hallway table before racing in to greet her Nan. I leaned against the doorway. 3 years ago, my grandmother suffered a stroke. I remember it well. Her falling on the floor, her hands shaking. I shuddered and pushed the thoughts out of my mind. I tried to flood my consciousness with positive memories. Our little chats, sneaking her a cigarette behind my mother's back. She was a lifelong ex-smoker who always found time to sneak a puff or two. I watched as Emily regaled her with stories of her day. My grandmother showed no emotion, no words. She rarely made eye contact. The last time she looked me in the eye was when I accidentally left the kettle boiling over in the kitchen. It was almost as if she knew it was going to happen. She had basic movement, and her physical therapist prescribed her knitting to focus the mind and hands to one activity. That is when the trouble started. Each week, her knitted tapestry would display symbols. It wasn't until the next day, or even sometimes the next hour, that the story began to make sense. Each symbol predicted some calamity about to happen. In June, her quilt produced a beautiful red and green forest extending out to the edges of her fabric. And the next day, the worst Amazon wildfire in recent history. In July, black pools of water with small animals dotted across. That hour, a large shipping container in the Gulf of Mexico capsized with thousands of animals wiped out. In a matter of hours, once I tried to pull the quilt from her, only for her heart monitor to start racing, nearing a heart attack. Out of sheer fear for her health, I gave it back. My grandmother was never callous, so I just knew she was not making this a reality. For whatever reason, she was tuned into a frequency I had no knowledge of. Okay, say goodbye to Nan. Millie grabbed her blue jacket and hat and ran out of the door. I gave my grandmother a kiss and left. This was the routine. Each week, I would sit with her, trying to interpret her visions. The day was different. I dropped Emily off to her father and made my way to my grandmother's house. I entered and sat beside her. I looked and saw the knitting needles snapped in two on the floor. What's the new prediction today? My casual attitude hid just how frightened I was by the whole ordeal. Squinting and moving the quilt, I was able to decipher the final symbols. A blue jacket, a woolly hat. I looked at my grandmother. She was staring right back at me. A single tear rolled down her face.